My children tried to steal nearly $1 million from me, and in the end, they were on their knees at my door, begging me to let them in. Do you know what it feels like when the people you love most stab you in the back, then smile at you as if nothing happened? Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would. And if you, for just a second, feel like this sounds familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me to keep unburdening myself. My name is Grace Elizabeth Walker. I am 73 years old, and for 45 years, I was an elementary school teacher in downtown San Antonio. I live in an old craftsman bungalow in the King William Historic District, with a yard full of purple wisteria that I planted with my own 2 hands when my children were small. Every morning, at 6 o'clock sharp, I get up to make coffee on the old blue gas stove I bought in 1985, back when my husband, Arthur, was still alive and would help me carry the grocery bags from the car. It was a Tuesday in October when my world collapsed like a house of cards. I was sitting in my wooden rocking chair, the same one where I nursed Michael and Jessica more than 40 years ago, reading the San Antonio Express News while waiting for the water to boil for my chamomile tea. The scent of the vanilla candle on my living room mantel mixed with the aroma of the toast I'd made for breakfast, when I heard the familiar sound of the wrought iron gate opening with that squeak I never bothered to fix because it reminded me that someone was coming home, but this time it wasn't a loving visit. Michael came in first, his polished black leather shoes gleaming in the patio light, his white shirt perfectly pressed, and that serious expression he'd adopted ever since he became a CPA. Behind him came Jessica, my youngest, with her designer handbag hanging from her shoulder and those sunglasses she never took off, not even inside the house. They both moved with the stiffness of people who had rehearsed what they were going to say, like actors preparing for a play I didn't know I was about to witness. "Mom," Michael said, without even giving me a kiss on the cheek like he had since he was a boy. "We need to talk to you about something very important." Jessica settled into the green velvet armchair that had belonged to my mother-in-law, crossed her legs, and looked at me with that smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's about your situation, Mom. We're worried about you." I set the newspaper down on the coffee table, next to the framed photo of all of us at Michael's wedding 8 years ago. In that picture, I'm holding my grandson Leo in my arms while he plays with my pearl earrings. We're all genuinely smiling. How different my family looked then, when I still believed that love was enough to keep the ones you cherish together. "My situation?" I asked, feeling a cold chill creep up my spine like when a norther blows through in January and the wind slips through the window cracks. Michael pulled a manila folder from his briefcase, the same kind he used for his clients at the accounting firm where he worked. "Mom, you're 73 now. This house is too big for you. You have a lot of money just sitting there not doing anything productive, and, well, at your age, it's normal to be a little forgetful sometimes." "I don't forget anything," I retorted, feeling indignation flush my cheeks. Jessica leaned forward with that honeyed voice she used as a child when she wanted something. "Of course not, Mommy. But wouldn't it be better if we helped you manage everything? We could put our names on the accounts too, just so when something happens there won't be any legal complications." "When something happens?" I repeated, feeling as if someone had turned on a faucet of ice-cold water in my stomach. Michael opened the folder and spread several documents on the table. "Dad left a considerable inheritance, Mom. $850,000 between properties, savings, and investments. That's a lot of money for one person." There it was, the naked truth, with no disguises or pretty words. They hadn't come to visit because they missed me. They hadn't come for coffee to ask how I'd slept. They had come for my money. I looked at the papers Michael had placed in front of me. Deeds of assignment, powers of attorney, contracts I didn't fully understand, but sensed meant handing over everything Arthur and I had built during 35 years of marriage. I remembered my husband's calloused hands from when he worked construction on weekends for extra money, how we counted coins on this very table every Sunday night, planning our children's future, dreaming of leaving them something better than what we'd had. "Do you think we're going to let you spend it all by yourself?" Jessica said, and her voice sounded different, harsher, as if she'd taken off a mask she'd been wearing for years. "At your age, you don't even know what you're doing anymore, Mom." Michael nodded, backing his sister up with the naturalness of someone who had rehearsed this conversation. Yeah, it's better to leave this to younger, sharper minds. It's for the best. You've lived your life. Those words fell on me like stones. You've lived your life, as if my life were a movie that had reached its end, and someone had decided it was time to turn off the screen. As if my 73 years were a terminal illness instead of an accumulation of wisdom and experience. I was quiet for a moment that felt eternal, watching these two people who had come from my womb, whom I had held in my arms for entire nights when they had fevers, whom I had defended from unfair teachers and cruel friends, whom I had taught to walk, to read, to be good human beings. Now they were sitting in my living room, surrounded by the memories of a happy family, speaking to me as if I were an annoying stranger who had overstayed her welcome in her own life. The silence grew so thick I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock that had belonged to my mother, the distant hum of traffic on the highway, and the beat of my own heart that felt like it wanted to burst from my chest. That's when I saw my grandson Leo peeking through the kitchen doorway, with his 8 years and those enormous eyes that looked so much like Michael's when he was little. The boy who used to run to me yelling, "Grandma Grace!" every time he visited now looked at me with a strange shyness, as if he didn't know if he had permission to come closer. "Come here, my love," I said, holding out my arms. But Jessica stood up quickly and took the boy by the hand. "Leo, go play in the yard. The grown-ups are talking about important things." The boy looked at me one last time before obeying his aunt, and in that look, I saw something that broke my soul: pity. My own grandson looked at me with pity, as if he already understood that something had changed forever in our family. Over the next few months, while I tried to process what had happened in my living room, Michael and Jessica began to execute their plan with the precision of surgeons performing open-heart surgery. I didn't realize it at first because they came with smiles and hugs, carrying boxes of donuts from the corner bakery and feigning concern for my well-being. "Mom, you look tired," Jessica would say while looking over the bills I had on the dining room table. "Why don't you let me help you with the bank accounts, just so you don't have to stress so much?" Michael would show up on Saturday mornings with his laptop under his arm, setting himself up at the kitchen table as if it were his personal office. "I'm going to get everything organized for you digitally, Mom. It's much easier this way. I just need your passwords so I can update your information." I, like the trusting fool I'd been my whole life, gave them every password, every account number, every document they asked for. I thought they were keeping their promise to take care of me, to make my life simpler. When Michael installed an app on my phone to monitor my health, I thought it was sweet that he worried so much. I didn't know that app was also tracking my calls and my location. When Jessica convinced me to switch doctors because Dr. Hernandez is getting too old and you need someone more up to date, I didn't suspect that the new doctor was a friend of her husband's and had agreed to write false medical reports in exchange for money. Reports that described an elderly woman with signs of cognitive decline and episodes of confusion and memory loss. Friday afternoons had become my favorite day because that's when Leo would visit after school. He would sit with me in the backyard, among the pots of red geraniums that bloomed all year, and tell me about his classes, his friends, the books he was reading. I would make him lemonade and shortbread cookies, the same ones I used to give his father at his age. But one Friday in December, when Leo arrived with his school uniform wrinkled and his Spider-Man backpack, something had changed in him. He sat next to me but didn't look me in the eye, nervously fiddling with the straps of his backpack and answering my questions in monosyllables. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, stroking his dark hair that always smelled like apple shampoo. Leo was quiet for a moment, looking at his school shoes that were already getting too small. "Grandma Grace? My dad says you're sick." I felt as if someone had hit me in the stomach with a hammer. "Sick? What did your dad talk to you about?" "He says that you sometimes forget important things and that's why they have to take care of your money now. He says it's normal when people get really old, that it's not your fault, but you can't make decisions by yourself anymore." My grandson's words came like daggers wrapped in the innocence of a child repeating what the adults had taught him to believe. My own children were using Leo to normalize my supposed incompetence, so that even my grandson would see me as a senile old woman who needed constant supervision. "Leo, look at me," I said, taking his little face in my hands. "Do you think your grandma is sick? Do you think I forget things?" The boy looked at me with those huge, confused eyes. "I don't know, Grandma. You remember everything. My birthday, my report card, even my teacher's name. But my dad knows more than I do." That night, after Leo left with his backpack and his bewilderment, I sat in my rocking chair with a cup of chamomile tea that had grown cold in my hands. The house felt different, as if the walls had absorbed poisonous words that now floated in the air I breathed. I started to remember little things I hadn't noticed before. The way Michael had started talking to me more slowly, as if I didn't understand things the first time. How Jessica had started repeating information I already knew. "Just in case you forgot, Mom." The way they would exchange glances when I told a story, as if they were evaluating whether what I was saying made sense. They had been building the narrative of my dementia piece by piece, like someone building a house brick by brick. Every conversation, every visit, every seemingly affectionate gesture had been part of a larger plan to justify what they were about to do. The confirmation came on a gray Thursday in January, when Maria, my neighbor for life, knocked on my door with a worried expression and a cup of coffee in her hands. "Grace, forgive me for sticking my nose where it doesn't belong, but I need to tell you something," she said, as she sat in my living room, on the same armchair where Jessica had spoken to me about my situation months before. Maria had seen Michael coming and going from my house when I wasn't there. She had seen him with an unknown man, looking at papers in my yard, taking pictures of my living room and kitchen. When she asked him what he was doing, Michael had told her they were evaluating the house to make some repairs that Mom needs but doesn't realize she needs. I also saw them at the bank, Grace. I saw them at Frost Bank with Mr. Morales, that attorney who has an office over on St. Mary Street. My cousin's friend works there as a secretary, and she told me they were asking about the procedures to have someone declared legally incompetent. Maria's words fell on me like ice water. My children didn't just want my money. They wanted to take away my dignity, my autonomy, my right to exist as a whole human being. They wanted to turn me into a legal minor, someone who needed permission to buy bread or decide what clothes to wear. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat up in bed, looking at the photographs on my nightstand. Michael at his college graduation, with that proud smile as I hugged him. Jessica on her wedding day, radiant in her white dress, telling me she hoped to be as good a mother as I had been. Leo as a baby, asleep in my arms while Arthur watched us tenderly from the armchair. At what point had these people I loved more than my own life become calculating strangers? At what point did I stop being their mother and become their financial target? The next day, Friday, January 18th, everything changed forever. I came back from the farmer's market with bags full of zucchini, tomatoes, and meat to make a pot roast, planning to invite Michael and Jessica over on Sunday to try and talk to them, to ask them directly what was going on. But when I reached my wrought iron gate, a young woman in a caregiver's uniform blocked my path. "Excuse me, ma'am, but you can't come in," she said with a firm voice, but avoiding my eyes. "What do you mean I can't come in? This is my house," I replied, feeling the grocery bag slip from my hands. Ms. Jessica gave me very clear instructions. She said you are no longer allowed to enter without the family's authorization. "I'm very sorry, but those are the orders." I stood there on the sidewalk, under the relentless 3 o'clock sun, as the zucchini rolled across the pavement and my neighbors pretended not to see the spectacle of an old woman being thrown out of her own home by a caregiver she didn't know. It was like a nightmare, but I was wide awake. I had to sit on the curb with my 73 years and my arthritic knees protesting against the cold concrete, while I processed what had just happened. The zucchini kept rolling towards the storm drain, as if even the vegetables wanted to escape this surreal situation. A woman passing by with her grocery cart looked at me with that mix of pity and morbid curiosity that people reserve for car accidents and other people's tragedies. "Are you all right, ma'am?" asked Mrs. Peterson from across the street, who had come out to water her plants as an excuse to see what drama was unfolding at my house. How could I explain to her that my own children had thrown me out of my home as if I were a tenant who hadn't paid rent? How could I tell her that the woman who had raised those children, who had sacrificed her own dreams to pay for their college tuition and school uniforms, was now sitting on the street because they had decided she was a nuisance? I'm fine. Thank you. I lied, because at 73, you learn that some pains are not meant to be shared with strangers, no matter how long. They've been your neighbors. Mrs. Peterson continued watering her begonias, but I knew her ears were more attuned to my drama than to the needs of her plants. In neighborhoods like ours, gossip travels faster than ambulances, and by Monday, the entire King William district would know that Grace Walker had been kicked out of her house by her own children. I pulled out my old flip phone, the model Michael was always telling me to trade in for something more modern, and dialed the number of Eleanor Vance, a friend from my youth with whom I'd lost touch after I was widowed. Eleanor had been a teacher with me at Jefferson Elementary for 15 years, until she retired and moved to a little house in the Tobin Hill neighborhood. Grace? What a surprise. It's been years, she answered with that warm voice that immediately reminded me why we had been such good friends. Eleanor, I need to ask you a huge favor. Could I stay with you for a few days? I'm having a family problem and I have nowhere to go. There was a silence on the other end of the line, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence of someone looking for an excuse. It was the silence of a woman quickly calculating how to accommodate a friend in crisis. Of course, Grace. Come over right now. Do you need me to come get you? Eleanor arrived in her white Toyota Camry 20 minutes later, her hair grayer than I remembered, but with the same determined smile that had always characterized her. She helped me pick up the scattered zucchini and the grocery bags, without asking any awkward questions about why the owner of a 2-story house was picking up vegetables from the sidewalk like a homeless person. During the drive to her house, I told her everything. I told her about the documents Michael had brought, about the fake medical reports, about Leo asking me if I was sick, about the caregiver who had blocked me from entering my own home. Eleanor listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding and gripping the steering wheel tighter each time I described a new betrayal. Sons of bitches, she muttered when I finished my story, and those words, coming from a retired teacher who had always been so proper, sounded like the absolution I needed. Eleanor's house was small but cozy, with pots of African violets in every window and the perpetual smell of fresh coffee that characterizes the homes of women who have learned to live alone without becoming bitter. She had a tiny living room with a floral print love seat and a coffee table filled with issues of Good Housekeeping and half-finished crossword puzzles. You can stay as long as you need, she said, showing me the sofa where I would sleep. And I don't want to hear a word about being a bother or paying rent. This is what friends are for. That first night at Eleanor's, lying on a sofa that wasn't mine, covered with a blanket that smelled of rose-scented fabric softener, I stayed awake until 4 a.m, crying silently. I wasn't crying from rage or physical pain. I was crying from a sorrow so deep it seemed to come from my bones, from that part of the soul where we store the disappointments that change us forever. I thought of all the nights I had stayed up with Michael when he had a fever as a child, putting damp washcloths on his forehead and singing him folk songs until he fell asleep. I remembered the times I had worked double shifts to pay for Jessica's piano lessons, because she insisted she wanted to be like the rich girls who had private tutors. I recalled every birthday, every Christmas, every school achievement I had celebrated with them as if they were my own triumphs. Had all of that been a long-term investment for them? Had every goodnight kiss, every hot meal, every "I love you, honey," simply been a way to secure their future inheritance? The days at Eleanor's house settled into a melancholic routine. I would wake up early because at 73, the body no longer knows the luxury of sleeping in. I'd make coffee for both of us, and sit in her small garden watching the plants she tended with the patience of someone who is no longer in a hurry. Eleanor would go out to do her shopping or visit her own grandchildren, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the constant hum of traffic from the nearby avenue. A week after I settled onto her sofa, my children finally called. First, it was Jessica, with that sickly sweet, concerned voice she had perfected since childhood. "Mom, where are you? We went to the house to look for you and you're not there. We're so worried about you." "Worried?" I repeated, feeling indignation flush my face. "Worried about the woman you hired a caregiver to keep out of her own house?" "Oh, Mom, that was a misunderstanding. Rose misunderstood the instructions. We just wanted someone to be there to look after you, to make sure nothing happened to you while you were alone." Lies wrapped in gift paper. Manipulation disguised as filial love. Where are you, Mom? We'll come get you right now. I'm not going to tell you where I am, and I don't want you to come get me. I want you to explain why you hired an attorney to have me declared incompetent. I want you to explain why you told Leo I'm sick in the head. There was an uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line. Mom, I don't know what you're talking about. I think someone is putting strange ideas in your head. That worries me a lot. There it was again. The insinuation that my mind wasn't working correctly, that my suspicions were the product of the senile dementia they had invented to justify their betrayal. Michael called 2 days later with a different strategy. He was no longer the concerned son. He was the CPA talking to me as if I were a problematic client. Mom, we need to resolve this misunderstanding immediately. You have financial responsibilities you can't just abandon. The property taxes on the house are due this month, and without you, we can't access the accounts. You can't access the accounts without me? But you asked me for all my passwords months ago. Why did you want them if not to access them without me? Mom, please don't complicate things. Just come back to the house and we'll sort this out as a family. I'm not coming back until you explain what you're doing with my money and why you hired an attorney without my knowledge. Michael exhaled with that exasperation he used to show when I didn't understand his explanations about investments and returns. Look, Mom, if you don't come back and you don't cooperate, we're going to have to take legal measures to protect your assets. It's for your own good. Threats. Now they were openly threatening me. After that call, I sat in Eleanor's garden among her rose bushes, finally understanding the magnitude of what I was facing. My children didn't just want my money. They were willing to destroy my reputation, my dignity, and my mental health to get it. And they had the legal tools and professional contacts to do it. It was a war, and I hadn't even known it had begun. That same afternoon, while Eleanor watched her soap opera and I pretended to read a 3-month-old issue of Good Housekeeping, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Leo, my grandson, and my heart sped up, thinking that maybe he wanted to see me, that maybe he missed our afternoons of lemonade and shortbread cookies. But when I opened the message, I found a photo that shattered my soul into pieces so small, I didn't know if I could ever pick them all up. It was a picture of my living room, my own living room, but completely transformed. They had removed the rocking chair where I spent my afternoons reading. They had moved my mother-in-law's green velvet armchair against the wall, and in the center, where my coffee table with the family photos used to be, there was now a modern glass desk with a computer I didn't recognize. Leo had written, "Grandma, look what they did to your living room. Dad says it's going to be his home office now because you don't use it anymore. You don't use it anymore." As if I were dead. As if my forced absence were a voluntary decision, a natural retirement from life that they could use to redistribute my space according to their convenience. I showed the photo to Eleanor, who was making quesadillas for dinner. She looked at the image for a long moment, then turned off the stove and sat next to me on the sofa. "Grace, do you have the deed to the house? Do you have the original papers?" "Yes, they're in my purse. I've carried them with me ever since Arthur died, just in case." "And your husband's will? Do you have that too?" I took the documents out of my black leather purse, the one I'd bought at the market 15 years ago, and that had accompanied me to every important appointment of my life. Eleanor reviewed each paper with the meticulousness of someone who had spent decades dealing with school bureaucracy and knew how to read the fine print. "Grace, look at this," she said, pointing to a clause in the will that I had never particularly noticed. "Your husband put a very specific condition here. It says that if anyone attempts to revoke your power of attorney without legitimate medical proof and official psychiatric evaluations from at least 2 recognized medical institutions, all assets are automatically frozen and remain under your exclusive control until the situation is legally resolved." I read the clause over and over, feeling something like hope begin to grow in my chest like a small but persistent plant. Arthur had always been a man who planned ahead, especially after seeing how his best friend's brothers had fought over the inheritance when the old man died. But I never thought that foresight would save me from my own children. "What does this mean exactly?" I asked Eleanor. "It means they can't do anything legally against you without real medical proof. And it means that if they try to do it with fake documents, you can activate this clause and block everything until a judge determines who's right." I didn't sleep that night, But for the first time in weeks, it wasn't from sadness, but from something akin to excitement. I had a weapon my children didn't know existed. I had an ace up my sleeve that Arthur had put there precisely to protect me from situations like this. The next day, Eleanor accompanied me to the office of Mr. Ramirez, an attorney who had handled some legal matters for the school where we worked. He was a man in his 60s, with a gray mustache and that slow way of speaking that characterizes lawyers who have seen too many family dramas to be surprised by anything. I told him the whole story. The fake medical reports, the passwords they had asked for, the caregiver who had blocked my entrance, Michael's threats about taking legal measures. Mr. Ramirez listened, taking occasional notes in a yellow legal pad that seemed to have lived through as many family tragedies as he had. Mrs. Walker, what your children are attempting to do is called elder financial abuse, and it's a federal crime, he told me when I finished my story. But the clause your husband included in the will is extraordinarily clever. With this, we can not only protect your assets, but also prove that the accusations of mental incapacity are false and malicious. The process was simpler than I expected. Mr. Ramirez contacted the attorney who had handled Arthur's original will, a man who had known us for decades and who perfectly remembered the conversations he'd had with my husband about protecting Grace from vultures who might take advantage of her widowhood. On an afternoon in February, while Michael and Jessica believed I was hiding like a helpless old woman, I was at the attorney's office signing the documents that would activate the Asset Protection Clause. With this, Mrs. Walker, all bank accounts, properties, and investments are under your exclusive control until any dispute over your mental capacity is legally resolved, the attorney explained. Your children can try whatever legal action they want, but they won't be able to touch a penny of your estate until they prove with legitimate medical documents that you truly need a legal guardian. But my revenge was just beginning. That same afternoon, I returned to my house accompanied by Mr. Ramirez and a process server. The caregiver who had blocked my entrance a week before now opened the gate for me with a nervous reverence, clearly confused by my legal entourage. Michael was in my living room, in my house, sitting behind the glass desk he had installed where my coffee table used to be. When he saw me walk in, his expression changed from surprise to irritation, as if I were an intruder interrupting his work in his personal office. "Mom, what are you doing here? Who are these people?" "I'm Attorney Ramirez." My lawyer introduced himself with the formality these situations require. "I legally represent Mrs. Grace Walker in this estate matter. We are officially notifying you that all bank accounts and properties under Mrs. Walker's name have been frozen until further notice, and that any attempt to access these assets without her written consent constitutes a federal crime." Michael stood up from my desk, his face growing paler by the second. "What are you talking about? My mother has memory problems. We are protecting her assets for her own good. Do you have official medical documents to prove that incapacity?" the process server asked. "Well, we're in the process of—" "He doesn't have them," I interrupted, feeling a strength in my voice I hadn't felt in months. "Because they don't exist. Because I'm not sick, Michael. I am perfectly lucid and perfectly aware that you two have been planning to steal everything your father and I built over 35 years of marriage." Just then, Jessica arrived, carrying shopping bags from Nordstrom and wearing that expression of feigned surprise she had perfected as a teenager. "Mom, it's so good to see you back. We were so worried." "Ma'am," Mr. Ramirez interrupted her, "you are also officially notified about the activated asset protection. Any documentation you may have submitted to any legal body to have your mother declared incompetent will be investigated for document fraud if it lacks the appropriate medical evaluations." I saw Michael and Jessica exchange a look that said it all. There was panic in their eyes, the sudden realization that their carefully crafted plan was crumbling like a sandcastle in the rain. "This is ridiculous," Michael muttered. "She's our mother. We just want to take care of her." "Then," I replied, feeling each word return a piece of my dignity, "show me that care by respecting my decisions and stopping this treatment of me as if I were a helpless child, incapable of managing her own life." But I knew this was just the beginning. The real war was just starting. The following days were an emotional roller coaster that kept me awake into the small hours of the morning, replaying every conversation, every gesture, every look I had exchanged with my children in recent months. I was back in my house, yes, but it no longer felt like my home. It felt like a battlefield where every corner held memories of the family I thought I had, and evidence of the betrayal I had actually been living. Michael and Jessica didn't leave immediately after the legal notification. They stayed that first night, circling my house like uncomfortable ghosts, whispering to each other in the kitchen while I pretended to watch TV in the living room. I could hear them making quiet phone calls, probably contacting the crooked lawyer they had hired to plan my legal incapacitation. "It can't be this hard," I heard Michael say to someone on the phone from the backyard. "She's a 73-year-old woman. There has to be a way to prove she's not in her right mind." Those words stabbed me like thorns. A 73-year-old woman. I had ceased to be their mother and had become an administrative obstacle, a legal problem to be solved, a statistic that represented the only thing standing between them and my money. The next day, Friday morning, Leo arrived for his routine visit, but this time he was accompanied by Jessica, who stood at the entrance to my living room like a bodyguard supervising a high-risk meeting. My grandson sat next to me on the sofa, but kept a physical distance, as if he had received specific instructions on how to behave around me. His little hands nervously played with the hem of his Dallas Cowboys t-shirt, and he avoided looking me directly in the eye. "Leo, my love, how are you? How was school this week?" I asked, trying to sound normal despite feeling Jessica's watchful gaze burning the back of my neck. "Fine, Grandma," he answered in a small voice, but he kept looking toward his aunt instead of at me. "Do you want me to make you some lemonade? Or would you prefer a glass of chocolate milk?" Leo finally looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw something that broke my heart. Confusion mixed with fear. "Mom says I can't eat things you give me anymore because sometimes you forget if they're still good or not." Jessica quickly approached from the doorway. "The thing is, Mom, the doctor says that sometimes older people don't realize when food has gone bad or when the expiration dates have passed. It's just for safety." Another lie wrapped in fake maternal concern. Another way to paint my supposed mental incompetence so that even my own grandson would start to see me as a dangerous old woman he needed to be protected from. "Leo," I said, taking his small hands in mine, "do you think your Grandma Grace doesn't know the difference between good food and bad food? Do you think the woman who has taken care of you since you were a baby suddenly doesn't know how to cook?" The boy looked at me with those huge, confused eyes. I could see him struggling internally between what his parents had taught him to believe and what his own memories told him about me. "I don't know, Grandma. My parents know more than I do." At that moment, I knew they had won an important battle. They had managed to sow doubt about my mental competence, even in the person who loved me most unconditionally in the world. My own grandson now saw me as someone to be wary of. That afternoon, after Jessica took Leo away with the excuse that they had to go buy school supplies, I sat in my rocking chair looking at the wisteria in the yard that already needed pruning. The phone rang, and when I answered, it was a voice I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Grace Walker?" "Yes, this is she. This is Dr. Martinez from University Hospital. Your son Michael asked me to contact you to schedule a neurological evaluation. He says the family is concerned about some episodes of confusion and memory loss you've been experiencing." There it was, the next step in their plan. Now they were contacting doctors directly, probably offering them money to diagnose problems that didn't exist. "Doctor, with all due respect, I have not had any episodes of confusion or memory loss. I do not need a neurological evaluation, and I do not authorize my son to make medical appointments on my behalf. Ma'am, I understand your resistance, but sometimes people who are developing cognitive issues are not aware of their own symptoms. It would be advisable to—" I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking, not from senility, but from pure indignation. How far were they willing to go? How many doctors, lawyers, and officials were they willing to bribe to achieve their goal? That evening, Michael came home with a different attitude. He was no longer the concerned son or the professional CPA. He was a desperate man who had exhausted his subtle options and was ready for a direct confrontation. "Mom, we need to talk, seriously," he said, sitting across from me in the living room without taking off his shoes. something I had always asked him to do since he was a child. Go on, I replied, crossing my arms. This situation has gotten out of control. You're acting irrationally. You've hired lawyers to fight against your own family. You're refusing medical help you clearly need. This can't go on. This can't go on? You mean you can't steal my money as easily as you thought? Michael shot up from the armchair violently, as if my words were physical blows. We are not trying to steal anything. We're trying to protect you from yourself. Look at yourself, Mom. You're paranoid. You think everyone is against you. You don't even trust your own children. I have reasons not to trust you, I replied, with a calmness that surprised even me. I have a caregiver who told me I couldn't enter my own house. I have a grandson who is afraid of me because you told him I'm crazy. I have doctors I don't know making appointments to evaluate me without my consent. Do you think that's paranoia, Michael? My son looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was pure contempt, with no disguises or pretense of filial affection. You know what, Mom? Fine. Keep your money. Live alone in this huge house, with no family, with no one to take care of you when you really start to need it. But don't come crying when you realize that money can't buy you companionship or love. He left that night, taking his things and the glass desk he had installed in my living room. Jessica came the next day to pick up some belongings she had left in the guest room, and her farewell was just as cold. I hope you're happy, Mom. I hope it's worth trading your family for a pile of cash. They left, but I knew they hadn't given up. I knew my children well enough to know that when they wanted something, they stopped at nothing to get it. This had just been their first failed strategy. They were surely planning their next move, and I was right. A week later, as I was watering my wisteria in the backyard, my neighbor Maria knocked on my door with a worried expression and a newspaper in her hands. "Grace, have you seen this?" she asked, handing me the local Express News, open to the classified section. There, in black letters on a white background, was an ad that took my breath away. Family seeks information on the whereabouts and mental state of Grace. Elizabeth Walker, 73, who suffers from senile dementia and may be a danger to herself and others. If you have seen her or have information on her location, please contact Michael Walker at phone number. They had published an ad in the newspaper, painting me as a demented and dangerous old woman lost in the city. They were destroying my reputation publicly, making sure that anyone who knew me would start to see me as a senile madwoman to be wary of. But this time, instead of crying or getting depressed, I felt something different growing in my chest. It was anger. It was determination. It was the clear understanding that if they wanted to play dirty, I had more experience than they could imagine. It was time to show them who Grace Elizabeth Walker really was. The newspaper ad was the last straw, but it was also the mistake I needed to prove how far my children were willing to go. That afternoon, I cut out the ad with my kitchen scissors and saved it in a folder along with all the documents I had been collecting. The false medical reports, the recordings of the threatening phone calls, the photographs I had taken of my living room turned into an office without my permission. Each piece of evidence was another brick in the wall of my legal defense. But it was also another stab in the heart of a mother who had believed for 73 years that family love was unconditional and sacred. The next day, I showed up at the offices of the San Antonio Express News in my best dress, the navy blue one I had worn to Michael's graduation, and with a dignity that had been forged in the slow fire of weeks of humiliation. I asked to speak to the editor in charge of the classifieds, a young man in his 30s who greeted me with the nervous courtesy of someone who senses they are about to get into legal trouble. "Sir, I am Grace Elizabeth Walker," I said, placing my driver's license on his desk. "I am the woman described in this classified ad as a lost and dangerous woman with dementia." The man reviewed the ad and then looked at me with a mixture of confusion and growing panic. "Ma'am, we didn't know that." "Of course you didn't know. Because the people who paid for this ad lied about my mental condition and my whereabouts. I am perfectly lucid. I live in my own home, and I have never been a danger to anyone. This ad is defamatory and was published with malicious intent to damage my reputation." I explained the whole situation to him. My children's attempt to have me declared incompetent, the falsified medical documents, the conspiracy to take over my estate. The editor took notes frantically as I spoke, clearly aware that his newspaper had been used as an instrument in a family fraud. Mrs. Walker, we will retract the ad immediately and publish an apology if you wish. We had no idea the information was false. I don't want apologies, I replied with the firmness I had learned to cultivate in these weeks of family warfare. I want you to provide me with all the information about who paid for this ad, when they paid for it, and if you have recordings of the conversations where they presented this false information about me. The editor gave me copies of everything: the receipt of payment in Michael's name, the transcript of the phone call where he had described my supposed dementia in elaborate and convincing detail, even a copy of the check he had used to pay for the ad. Every document was more proof of the conspiracy they had mounted against me. That same afternoon, my lawyer filed a defamation lawsuit against Michael, using the newspaper ad as the primary evidence. But I knew they wouldn't stop there. I knew my children, and when they felt cornered, their creativity for causing pain became infinite. I didn't have to wait long to discover their next move. On Sunday morning, as I was getting ready to go to Mass at St. Joseph's Church as I had done for 40 years, my phone started ringing off the hook. First, it was Mrs. Peterson, my neighbor from across the street. "Grace, are you okay? I saw some posts on Facebook that have me very worried." Then Refugio, the woman who sold corn on the corner of my street, called. "Mrs. Grace, is what they're saying about you on social media true?" Then it was Father Gonzalez from St. Joseph's. "Grace, my child, some rumors about your mental health have reached my ears that have me very concerned." With my heart racing, I asked Eleanor to help me check Facebook, the social network I had never fully understood, but which had apparently become the new battlefield where my children had decided to destroy my reputation. What we found left me speechless. Jessica had created a post on her personal profile, with a photo of me taken without my knowledge where I appear sitting in my rocking chair, with my hair slightly disheveled by the wind. The photo was accompanied by a text that made me tremble with indignation. "With a heavy heart, I'm sharing with you all that my mom, Grace, is going through a very severe mental decline. She has started having paranoid episodes where she believes her own family wants to harm her. She has become aggressive, distrustful, and no longer recognizes the people who love her most. We have begged her to accept medical help, but she flatly refuses. As a family, we are devastated to see the woman we love so much getting lost in her own mind. We ask for your prayers that she finds peace and accepts the treatment she needs." The post had 73 comments from people I had known for decades, teachers who had worked with me, neighbors who greeted me every day, parents of children I had taught for years, all expressing pity for my mental decline and admiration for the patience and love my children were showing in this difficult family situation. Michael had shared his sister's post, adding his own comment, "It's so painful to watch our mom pull away from us because of an illness she can't control. But we will continue to fight for her, no matter how much she rejects us or how much she hurts us with her accusations. A family's love is stronger than any illness." They had turned my resistance to their theft into symptoms of dementia. They had transformed my legitimate legal defense into paranoid episodes. They had painted my refusal to be scammed as senile aggression, and they had done it publicly, in front of my entire community, ensuring that anyone who saw me on the street would look at me with pity instead of respect. But the most painful part was the comments. People who had known me for decades were now writing things like, "Poor Mrs. Grace, how sad to see her like this," and "What noble children she has. Anyone else would have abandoned her by now," and "It's normal at that age. My grandmother got very difficult before she passed away too." In a single Facebook post, my children had achieved what months of legal manipulation had not. They had turned me into a victim of my own supposed mental illness in the eyes of my entire community. That night, after reading every single comment with the masochism of someone who can't stop touching a painful wound, I sat in my rocking chair in the backyard and cried, as I hadn't cried since Arthur died. But I didn't cry from sadness. I cried from rage. I cried from indignation. I cried from a fury so pure it frightened me. Eleanor stayed with me that night, sleeping on the living room sofa in case I needed company. At 3 in the morning, she found me sitting in the kitchen with a cold cup of tea in my hands, staring at the family photos I had stuck to the refrigerator. "Grace, are you okay? Do you know what the saddest part of all this is, Eleanor?" I said without looking away from a photo where Michael and Jessica are hugging me on Mother's Day last year. "It's not that they want my money. Money comes and goes. What hurts me is that they're willing to destroy my dignity, my reputation, my place in this community where I've lived my whole life, just to get it." Eleanor sat next to me and placed her hand on mine. "Grace, I've known you for over 30 years. Anyone who really knows you knows you're not crazy. The truth will out. But the people who don't know me well will believe what they read on Facebook. And my grandchildren will grow up thinking that their Grandma Grace was a senile old woman who turned against her own family." At that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. I got up from the kitchen table, went to my room, and took a shoebox from the closet where I kept important documents that no one else knew about. Inside was something that not even my lawyer knew existed. An audio recording I had made on my phone the day Michael and Jessica first came to talk to me about my situation. It was a 45-minute recording where you could clearly hear my children planning to have me declared incompetent, how they had contacted the corrupt doctor, how they had discussed dividing my estate as if I were already dead. It was all there, in their own voices, with no possibility of denial or manipulation. Arthur had always told me that when people underestimate you for being an older woman, that underestimation becomes your secret weapon. It was time to use it. The next day, Monday morning, I dressed in my gray pantsuit, the one I used to wear for important meetings at school, styled my hair into a neat bun, and applied my makeup with the care of a woman who knows she is about to fight the most important battle of her life. Eleanor drove me to the studios of the local CBS affiliate, where I had secured a meeting with the producer of the morning show, San Antonio Today. The producer, a woman in her 40s named Patricia Morales, greeted me in her office, which was filled with television screens and journalism awards. I told her my entire story, omitting no details, showing her every document, every piece of evidence, every proof of the conspiracy my children had mounted against me. "Mrs. Walker," Patricia said after listening to my story for an hour, "this is exactly the kind of story we need to tell. Elder financial abuse is a silent epidemic in America, and most victims never get the chance to defend themselves publicly." But I had something else to show her. I took out my old flip phone and played her excerpts from the recording I had secretly made the day Michael and Jessica came to talk about my situation. Michael's voice came through, clear and cold. "Look, Jessica, the doctor says that with the reports we gave him, he can justify a diagnosis of senile dementia. It's going to cost an extra $500, but it's worth it if we can speed up the legal process." And Jessica's voice, equally calculating. "And what if Mom resists? What if she tries to fight back? A 73-year-old woman against two professionals with legal contacts? Please. Besides, who's going to believe her? She's old enough that people will just assume she's losing her mind." Patricia listened to the recording, her eyes growing wider. "Mrs. Walker, do I have your permission to use this recording on the air? With this, we can prove that everything they did to you was premeditated and malicious. Use whatever you need," I replied. "I have nothing left to lose, and maybe my story can help other people who are going through the same thing." The segment aired on Wednesday morning. I appeared on set, sitting with my hands resting calmly in my lap, speaking with the serenity of a woman who had decided she would not let anyone humiliate her ever again. I told my story without tears, without melodrama, just with the dignity of the facts and the strength of the truth. When they played the clips from the recording, I could see the same outrage on the host's face that I had been feeling for weeks. The show's phone lines began to light up immediately with calls from viewers wanting to express their support or share similar stories of family abuse. "What we want our viewers to understand," I said, looking directly into the camera, "is that it doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. No one has the right to steal your dignity or your assets. And if you are the son or daughter of an elderly person, remember that your parents are not an investment you get to cash in when they die. They are human beings who deserve respect until the very last day of their lives." The impact was immediate and devastating for Michael and Jessica. Within 2 hours of the broadcast, my phone started ringing with furious calls from both of them. Michael was first. "Mom, Are you insane? How could you go on television and talk about private family matters? You've made a public fool of us. Michael, I responded with a calm that surprised me. I didn't make a fool of you. You made fools of yourselves when you decided to conspire against your own mother. I only told the truth. You made that recording without our consent. That's illegal. In Texas, a person has the right to record conversations in their own home as long as one party consents. Check with your crooked lawyer, Michael. I'm sure he can explain the laws better than I can. Jessica called 20 minutes later with a different strategy. She was no longer the manipulative daughter. Now she was the misunderstood victim. Mom, how could you do this to us? We're your family. Everyone we know saw the show. The parents at Leo's school are all talking about us. You've ruined your own grandson's reputation. Jessica, Leo's reputation was damaged the day you two decided to publish lies about my mental health on Facebook. A child shouldn't have to grow up watching his parents destroy his grandmother for money. It's not about money. It's because you're sick and you won't accept it. Then prove it. Take me to an independent neurologist, to a psychiatrist who isn't a friend of your husband's, to any legitimate doctor you want. If I'm really sick, real medical tests will prove it. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. We both knew that no legitimate doctor would find any evidence of dementia or cognitive decline in me. We can't fix this as a family anymore, Jessica finally mumbled. This has all spiraled out of control. It spiraled out of control the day you decided to treat me like your property instead of your mother. The following days were a revelation about the power of the truth when it's told publicly. I received calls of support from people I didn't even know. Letters from other older women who had gone through similar situations, and even visits from journalists from other outlets who wanted to do a deeper dive into the issue of elder financial abuse. But the most important call came on Friday afternoon. It was from the Bexar County District Attorney's Office, from their elder fraud unit, informing me that they had opened an official investigation into Michael and Jessica for fraud, forgery, and financial abuse. The recording I had played on television was enough evidence to initiate criminal proceedings. Mrs. Walker, the prosecutor explained, with the evidence you've provided, we can proceed criminally against your children. If found guilty, they could face between 5 and 12 years in prison, in addition to the permanent loss of any inheritance rights to your estate. That night, as I ate a cheese quesadilla I'd made with ingredients from the market, alone in my kitchen, I reflected on the irony of the situation. My children had tried to use my age and gender against me, assuming that an older woman was by definition vulnerable. They hadn't counted on the fact that this same older woman had 73 years of experience facing adversity. 73 years of learning to be strong when the world expected her to be weak. On Saturday morning, as I was watering my wisteria in the backyard, I heard someone at my gate. It was Leo, my grandson, with Michael. But this time, the boy wasn't hiding behind his father. He ran toward me with the spontaneity that adults lose when they learn to calculate every gesture. Grandma Grace! I saw you on TV. My friends at school say you're famous. I hugged him, feeling something inside my chest begin to mend. Leo didn't see me as a demented old woman. He saw me as the grandmother who had been on television, who had been brave, who had fought for what was right. Michael stood by the gate with an expression I had never seen on his face. He wasn't the arrogant CPA or the manipulative son. He was a defeated man who had miscalculated and was now facing the consequences of his actions. Mom, he said, his voice sounding strangely small, we need to talk. Now you want to talk? I replied, without letting go of Leo. After months of scheming behind my back, after publishing lies about my mental health, after trying to steal my house and my money, now you want to talk. Things got out of hand. This wasn't how we planned it. This wasn't how you planned it? What was the plan then, Michael? To have me declared insane in silence, steal my assets in secret, and wait for me to die without causing any trouble? Leo looked up at me, confused, clearly not understanding the entire conversation, but sensing the tension between his father and me. Grandma, he whispered in my ear, did my dad do something bad? It was the question I didn't know how to answer. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that his father had tried to rob his own mother? How do you protect a grandchild's innocence without lying about the reality of what had happened? Your dad made some wrong choices, my love. But sometimes adults can fix their mistakes if they're willing to do the right thing. I looked Michael straight in the eye. The question is whether you're willing to do the right thing, son. Michael was silent for a moment that felt eternal, looking at his son who was still hugging me with the innocent trust of someone who doesn't fully understand adult betrayals, but recognizes genuine love. I could see something in my eldest child's eyes that I hadn't seen in months. Real shame, not the feigned shame of someone who's been caught, but the deep shame of someone who is finally realizing the magnitude of what he has done. "Leo, go play in the backyard," he told his son, his voice softer than it had been with me in a long time. "Your grandmother and I need to talk about grown-up things." The boy gave me a kiss on the cheek and ran toward the wisteria, where he started looking for roly-polies under the leaves, just as I had taught him to do when he was very little. Michael and I were left alone under the shade of the lime tree that Arthur had planted when Leo was born. "Mom, the DA's office has summoned me for a statement on Monday," Michael said, sitting on one of the plastic chairs in the yard. "My lawyer says that with the recording you presented and all the evidence you have, Jessica and I could face up to 12 years in prison. And that worries you?" I asked, remaining standing, holding myself with the dignity of a woman who had decided not to show weakness to the one who tried to destroy her. "Of course it worries me. I have a son. I have responsibilities. I can't go to prison." There it was again. No remorse for hurting me. No apology for trying to steal from me. Just concern for the consequences he would have to face. "Michael, for 8 months you two planned to have me declared legally incompetent. You hired corrupt doctors, forged documents, threw me out of my own house, destroyed my reputation publicly, and even used my grandson to make me think I was losing my mind. At any point in that whole process, did you think about the consequences I would have to face?" My son looked down at his shoes, those shiny leather shoes I had once admired as a symbol of the professional success he had achieved. "It wasn't personal, Mom. We just needed the money. Jessica and her husband are about to get a divorce, and he's going to ask for half of everything. I have debts from the firm that I can't pay. We thought that if you couldn't manage your finances anymore, we could—" "Not personal?" I repeated, feeling indignation rise in my throat like bile. "Michael, you tried to have me declared insane. You made my own grandson afraid of me. You kicked me out of my home as if I were a stranger. How is that not personal? We never wanted to hurt you. We just wanted to secure the family's future." "The family's future? What family, Michael? The family you destroyed when you decided to see your mother as a walking bank account? The family that ended the day you chose money over respect?" Just then, Leo came running back from the yard with a roly-poly in his small palm. "Grandma, look, I found a super big one. Can you help me put it in your garden so it can eat the pests?" His innocence was like a ray of light in the middle of the darkness that had consumed my family. This boy still saw me as the grandmother who loved him unconditionally, who taught him about beneficial insects and made him lemonade. To him, I was still the same person I'd always been. "Of course, my love," I said, taking the bug carefully. "Roly-polies are very important because they keep the plants healthy without using harmful chemicals." As I helped Leo place the roly-poly on a rose leaf, I felt Michael's gaze on us. When I turned to look at him, there were tears in his eyes, but I didn't know if they were tears of genuine regret or tears of self-pity for the consequences he faced. "Leo," Michael said to his son, "we have to go now. Your mom is waiting for us." "Can't I stay longer with Grandma? I haven't been here in a long time." "Another day, son. We have to go now." After Leo said goodbye with a promise to return soon, Michael and I were alone again. It was my chance to ask him something that had been tormenting me for weeks. "Michael, I need you to answer something honestly. How long were you planning this? When did I stop being your mother and become your financial target?" My son ran his hands through his hair, with that nervous gesture he'd had since childhood when he knew he'd done something wrong. "Since Dad died," he finally admitted. "Since we found out how much money he'd left. At first it was just curiosity, but then we started calculating how long you might live, how much money you might spend, what would happen if you developed some expensive illness." His words hit me like physical punches. Since Arthur died, from the most vulnerable moment of my life, when I was mourning the loss of the man I had loved for 35 years, My children were already calculating when they could collect their inheritance. While I was mourning your father's death at that funeral, while I couldn't even get out of bed from the pain, you were already planning how to take what he had left to take care of me. It wasn't like that, Mom. It wasn't that calculated at first. No? Then when did it become calculated, Michael? When exactly did you decide that I was an obstacle you had to remove? Michael didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. At that moment, my phone rang. It was Jessica, but this time her voice sounded different. She wasn't the manipulative daughter or the misunderstood victim. She was a desperate woman. Mom, please, I need to talk to you. Jorge filed for divorce and he's asking for half of everything, including the house. If I go to jail for this fraud thing, I'm going to lose my kids. Please, I need you to drop the charges. Jessica, where is Leo? Michael said he was with you. I lied. I'm not with Leo. I'm at my lawyer's office, trying to find a way out of this mess. Leo is with his mother, and Jorge says if I have a criminal record, he'll fight for full custody. There was the real reason for her call. It wasn't regret for hurting me. It was panic about the consequences her actions would have on her own life. Mom, please. I know we were wrong. I know what we did was terrible. But we're your family. You can't send us to prison. Jessica, you didn't treat me like family when you decided to conspire against me. You treated me like a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. Why should I treat you like family now? Because we are. No matter how many mistakes we've made, we're still your children. We're still the family that Dad wanted you to take care of. The mention of Arthur was a low blow, a desperate attempt to manipulate my emotions using the memory of the man I had loved most in my life. Don't you mention your father, I said with a coldness that surprised me. Your father left me protected specifically against what you tried to do. He knew there might be unscrupulous relatives who would try to take advantage of my widowhood, but he never imagined those relatives would be his own children. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. What do you want us to do, Mom? What do you need to forgive us? It was the first time in months that one of my children had asked me what I needed, instead of telling me what they needed. I want a public apology, I said, looking at Michael, who was still sitting in the plastic chair listening to my conversation. I want you to post on the same Facebook page where you slandered me a full apology, admitting that you lied about my mental health, that I'm not sick, that everything you did was an attempt to illegally appropriate my assets. Mom. And I want Leo to know the truth. I don't want my grandson to grow up believing his grandmother was crazy. I want you to explain to him that you were wrong, that you lied, that I was always fine. And if we do that, will you drop the charges? I looked at Michael, who was watching me with a mixture of hope and fear in his eyes. No, I finally replied. I will not drop the charges. But Mom, you just said that. I told you what I want you to do. I didn't say it would erase the consequences of your actions. You are adults. You made adult decisions. Now you will face adult consequences. I hung up the phone and stared at the wisteria, which was blooming, unperturbed by the family storm that had battered my life in recent months. Are you really going to send us to prison, Mom? Michael asked, his voice like that of a scared child. Michael, I'm not sending you to prison. The justice system is sending you to prison. I'm just going to let the law take its course. But we're your family. Family doesn't hurt family for money, son. What you did wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated betrayal that went on for months. And betrayals have consequences. That night, for the first time in months, I slept soundly. The following days were a strange mix of tranquility and tension, like the silence that precedes a big storm. I had made my decision not to drop the charges, and that certainty gave me a peace I hadn't felt since this whole nightmare began. In the mornings, I returned to my usual routines. Coffee at 6, watering the plants at 7, reading the newspaper in my rocking chair while listening to the familiar sounds of the neighborhood waking up. But on Tuesday afternoon, when I least expected it, something happened that reminded me that family wars never end the way you think they will. I was making iced tea in the kitchen when I heard a car pull up in front of my house. Through the window, I saw a white sedan I didn't recognize, and a young man in his 30s, wearing a cheap suit and carrying a manila folder, got out. Behind him came Michael, but something about his posture was different. He wasn't walking with the defeated arrogance of the last few days. He was walking with determination. When I opened the door, the young man introduced himself as Mr. Martinez, legal representative for your children in this unfortunate family misunderstanding. His way of speaking was smooth, rehearsed, like someone who had practiced this speech in front of a mirror. Mrs. Walker, I've come to propose a solution that will benefit all parties involved. Your children are genuinely sorry for the mistakes they made, and they are prepared to make the necessary reparations to restore family harmony. Michael stood behind the lawyer, not making eye contact with me, like a child hiding behind his mother after breaking something valuable. What kind of reparations? I asked, though I already suspected this was another calculated move in a game that never ended. Mr. Martinez opened his folder and took out several documents printed on what looked like official, expensive letterhead. Your children are willing to formally transfer all properties that were under shared administration to you, in addition to paying a financial compensation of $50,000 for the emotional distress caused. In return, you would sign an out-of-court settlement that would resolve this conflict without the need for criminal proceedings. $50,000. As if the pain of a betrayed mother could be bought with a check. As if months of humiliation, defamation, and emotional abuse had a market price that could be settled with money. And what happens to the district attorney's investigation? I asked, leafing through the documents filled with legalese designed to confuse people who hadn't studied law. As part of the agreement, you would commit to stating to the authorities that it was all a family misunderstanding, that there was no criminal intent, and that you prefer to resolve the matter privately. This would automatically close the criminal investigation. Michael finally spoke, his voice sounding more rehearsed than spontaneous. Mom, we think this is the best solution for everyone. We acknowledge our mistakes, you receive fair compensation, and the family can begin to heal without anyone ending up in prison. I looked at both of them for a long moment, feeling something cold and calculating crystallize in my chest. This wasn't remorse. This was a negotiation. They had come to buy my silence, to put a price on my dignity, to turn their betrayal into a business transaction that would allow them to escape the legal consequences of their actions. May I ask you something? I finally said, sitting in my rocking chair while they remained standing in my living room. Of course, Mrs. Walker, the lawyer replied with that professional smile taught in law schools. If I had really been an old woman with dementia, as you claimed, would you have come to offer me this deal? Or would you have simply proceeded with your original plan until you left me in a nursing home while you divided up my inheritance? The question hung in the air like toxic smoke. Mr. Martinez exchanged a quick glance with Michael, and in that split second, I could see the answer that neither of them would dare to verbalize. Mrs. Walker, what's important is the present, not speculation about hypothetical scenarios. It's not hypothetical, I interrupted. For 8 months, you proceeded as if I were exactly that demented, helpless old woman. The only reason I'm sitting here negotiating with you now instead of being committed to a psychiatric hospital is because I turned out to be smarter and more prepared than you calculated. Michael shifted uncomfortably, as if my words were stones hitting his body. Mom, it doesn't matter what might have happened. What matters is that we can fix this and move forward as a family. As a family? I repeated, a bitter laugh rising from my stomach. Michael, do you really think that after everything that's happened, we can go back to being a normal family? Do you think I can sit at the Christmas dinner table with you and Jessica and pretend I don't know what you're capable of when you want money? Mr. I. Martinez tried to regain control of the conversation. Mrs. Walker, I understand these have been very difficult months for you, but out-of-court settlements exist precisely to repair this kind of family damage without completely destroying the relationships. With time, wounds heal. Wounds heal, I cut in again, but betrayals leave permanent scars. And what my children did wasn't an accidental wound. It was a planned betrayal, executed with surgical precision. I got up from my rocking chair and went to the mantel where I kept the family photographs I had once cherished. I picked up the photo from Michael's graduation, where I am hugging him with maternal pride while he smiles with his diploma in hand. Do you know what's the saddest part of all this, Michael? In this picture, you're looking at me as if I'm the most important person in the world, and I'm looking at you as if you're my greatest achievement in life. At what point did the woman in this photo become an obstacle that needed to be removed? Michael didn't answer, but I could see his eyes fill with tears that seemed genuine for the first time in months. Do you know what my answer to your proposal is, Mr. Martinez? I continued, addressing the lawyer who now seemed less sure of his negotiating strategy. What is it, Mrs. Walker? No, but ma'am, $50,000 is a very generous offer, considering I'm not interested in your money. I'm not interested in your settlement. And I am definitely not interested in helping you escape the consequences of your actions. Mr. Martinez closed his folder with a gesture that was meant to be dramatic, but only came off as pathetic. Mrs. Walker, I want you to understand that if you reject this offer and the criminal process continues, your children will face prison sentences that could ruin their professional lives forever. Michael would lose his CPA license. Jessica could lose custody of her children. Mr. Martinez, I said with a calm that surprised me, my children are adults who made adult decisions. If those decisions have consequences that ruin their professional lives, those are consequences they earned for themselves. Michael finally exploded. Mom, we're your family. You can't send us to prison over money. Over money, I repeated, feeling indignation flush my cheeks. Michael, you are the ones who did all of this for money. I am doing this for dignity, for respect, for the idea that actions have consequences and that no one, not even your own children, has the right to destroy their parents when it's convenient for them. But you're going to destroy your own family. My family was destroyed the day you decided to conspire against me. I'm not destroying anything. I am simply allowing justice to take its course. That night, after Michael and his lawyer left empty-handed and with their tails between their legs, I sat in my backyard with a cup of chamomile tea, looking at the stars that shone over San Antonio like silent witnesses to all the human dramas unfolding under their light. For the first time in months, I felt completely at peace with my decisions. But the universe wasn't finished testing me. On Friday morning, as I was preparing my breakfast of scrambled eggs, I heard a car stop in front of my house. When I looked out the window, I saw something that froze my blood. It was Jessica. But she wasn't alone. She was with her 2 young children, my grandchildren, Sophia and Matthew, ages 6 and 4. The children got out of the car with their little school backpacks and confused faces, clearly not understanding why they were visiting their grandmother on a Friday morning when they should have been in class. Jessica took them by the hands and walked toward my door with the determination of someone about to play her last card. When I opened the door, Sophia ran to me yelling, "Grandma Grace!" with the pure joy only small children can express. Matthew, more shy, hid behind his mother's legs but gave me a toothless grin that melted my heart. "Hi, Mom," Jessica said, her voice sounding strangely calm. "The kids wanted to see you before we leave." "Before you leave? Where are you going?" "Jorge is taking the kids to live with him in Denver. He says that as long as I have pending legal problems, he doesn't want the children with me." I felt as if someone had punched me in the stomach with a hammer. My youngest grandchildren, who barely understood what was happening in our family, were going to be separated from their mother and taken away from me because of the consequences of their own parents' actions. "Grandma," Sophia said, pulling on the hem of my dress, "Mommy says we might not see you for a long time. Is that true?" It was the question I didn't know how to answer without destroying a 6-year-old's innocence. I knelt down to Sophia's level, taking her small hands in mine as I felt my heart break into microscopic pieces. Her brown eyes looked at me with the absolute trust that children place in the adults they love, expecting me to have answers that would soothe her confusion. "My love," I said, choosing each word with the care of someone who knows they are shaping an innocent creature's memory. Sometimes adults have complicated problems that children can't solve. But I want you to know that your Grandma Grace will always love you, no matter where you are. Matthew came out from behind Jessica's legs and approached me with the timid bravery he had inherited from his grandfather Arthur. "Grandma, did you do something bad? My daddy says that's why we have to go far away." The question from my 4-year-old grandson pierced me like a spear. Jorge had turned my legitimate defense against theft and betrayal into something his children needed to be protected from. He had painted my quest for justice as if I were the villain of this story. "No, my sweet boy," I answered, stroking his dark hair that always smelled like apple shampoo. Grandma didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups don't agree on important things, and that makes sad things happen. Jessica stood in my living room, watching this interaction with an expression I couldn't decipher. It wasn't the calculating arrogance of the past few months or the manipulative desperation of recent days. It was something more complex, more painful. "Kids," Jessica said, her voice sounding forcedly cheerful, "go play in Grandma's yard while she and I talk for a little bit." Sophia and Matthew ran to the backyard, where they started chasing the butterflies flitting around the wisteria flowers. Their laughter drifted into the living room like echoes of a happiness that was about to be cut short by adult decisions they neither asked for nor caused. "Mom," Jessica said once we were alone, "I came to do something I never thought I would have to do." She sat on my mother-in-law's green velvet sofa, in the same spot where she had come months ago to talk about my situation, but now her posture was completely different. She wasn't the confident woman who had planned to steal my inheritance. She was a desperate mother who was losing her children because of the consequences of her own actions. "I came to beg you," she continued, her voice breaking on that word as if it physically hurt her to say it. "I came to get on my knees if I have to. Please, drop the charges." "Jessica." "No, let me finish. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know what Michael and I did was unforgivable, but my children don't deserve to pay for our mistakes." Sophia cries every night, asking why her daddy says her mommy is a bad person. Matthew has started wetting the bed again since all this legal stuff started. Her words came like daggers straight to the maternal heart that, despite everything, still beat for my innocent grandchildren. Jorge already has everything arranged to take them to Denver tomorrow morning. He says that as long as I have a criminal investigation pending, he won't allow the children to live in a toxic and unstable environment. His exact words. I sat in my rocking chair, feeling the weight of a decision I hadn't anticipated having to make. For months I had been fighting for my dignity, for my right to be respected, for the idea that betrayals must have consequences. But now, sitting across from my silently crying daughter, listening to the laughter of my grandchildren in the yard, I realized that justice sometimes comes at a price we hadn't calculated. "And what about Michael?" I asked. "Did he come to beg too?" Jessica shook her head. "Michael says that if you're going to destroy the family, you might as well do it completely. He says he doesn't care about going to prison anymore because he's already lost his mother anyway." Those words hurt more than I expected. Michael had decided he would rather see me as an enemy than fully admit his mistakes and ask for forgiveness without conditions. "But I am here to admit everything, Mom. I'm here to tell you that we were terrible children, that we don't deserve your forgiveness, that what we did was theft and betrayal and abuse. I'm here to tell you that you're right about everything, and that I understand why you want to see us in prison." Her tears were different from any I had seen from her in these months. They weren't tears of manipulation or self-pity. They were the tears of a mother who was losing her children because of her own greed. "But I'm also here to tell you that if you forgive me, if you drop the charges, I swear on my dad's memory that I will never ask you for another penny. I will never again meddle in your financial decisions. I'll stay away from you if that's what you want, but please don't let my children pay for what I did." At that moment, Sophia ran in from the yard. "Grandma! Grandma! I found a hummingbird's nest in your lime tree. Come see." I took her hand and followed her to the yard, where there was indeed a small hummingbird's nest hidden among the branches of the tree Arthur had planted when Leo was born. It was a tiny, perfectly constructed nest, with 2 pea-sized eggs that shone like pearls in the sunlight. "Are they going to hatch soon, Grandma?" Sophia asked, with the infinite curiosity of a 6-year-old. "Yes, my love. In a few weeks, 2 baby hummingbirds will hatch and learn to fly right here in this yard." "And will we be here to see them?" My granddaughter's question pierced me like an arrow, straight to the heart of the dilemma I had been avoiding. If I maintained the charges against Jessica, these children would leave for Denver tomorrow morning and wouldn't be here to see the hummingbirds hatch. They wouldn't be here for me to teach them about life, about nature, about the unconditional love a grandmother can give. "I don't know, sweetheart," I answered honestly. "That depends on some very complicated decisions the grown-ups have to make." Matthew approached us, carrying a roly-poly he had found under a rose leaf. Grandma, can you help me put it in the right place? I forgot where you said they like to live. As I helped Matthew place the bug on a leaf where it could do its natural pest control work, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in months. These children represented something more important than my wounded pride or my need for justice. They represented the future, the possibility that something good and pure could grow from the ashes of this destroyed family. We returned to the living room, where Jessica was still sitting with red but dry eyes, awaiting my verdict like a defendant awaiting sentencing. Jessica, I said, sitting across from her, if I drop the charges, it's not because I forgive you. It's not because I'll forget what you did. And it is definitely not because I think you deserve another chance. My daughter nodded, understanding she was about to hear conditions she couldn't negotiate. If I drop the charges, it's because those children don't deserve to lose their mother because of the mistakes their mother made. It's because I don't want Sophia and Matthew to grow up thinking their Grandma Grace chose revenge over their well-being. I swear, Mom, I'll never— Don't swear anything to me, I interrupted. Your promises have no value to me anymore, but I will do this for my grandchildren, not for you. I stood up and went to the phone to call my lawyer. As I dialed the number, I could hear Sophia and Matthew laughing in the yard, oblivious to the adult drama that had been defining their fates. Mr. Ramirez, I said when he answered, this is Grace Walker. I need you to immediately withdraw the complaint against my daughter, Jessica. There was a silence on the other end of the line. Mrs. Walker, are you sure? With all the evidence we have, it's very likely that— I'm completely sure. Withdraw the complaint against Jessica immediately. And what about the complaint against Michael? I looked out at the yard, where my grandchildren were still playing with the innocence of those who don't know their world was just saved by a last-minute decision. That one stands, I replied with a firmness that surprised me. Michael had the same opportunity as Jessica to come here and beg for his children. He chose his pride. She chose her children. The consequences will match the choices. I hung up the phone and turned to Jessica, who was looking at me with a mixture of relief and confusion. Why didn't you drop Michael's too? Because Michael didn't come here as a desperate mother. He came as a calculating CPA trying to negotiate a cheap way out. You came as a mother. The difference is important. That afternoon, as Jorge canceled the plane tickets to Denver and Jessica hugged her children as if she hadn't seen them in years, I sat in my rocking chair and reflected on the price of justice and the value of forgiveness. I hadn't forgiven Jessica. I probably never would completely. But I had chosen my grandchildren over my thirst for revenge, and that choice gave me a different kind of peace than the one I had expected to find. Michael, on the other hand, would face the full consequences of his actions. He had had the chance to choose humility over pride, family over ego, but he had preferred to maintain his stance to the end. Sometimes, justice isn't perfect, but sometimes, the imperfection of justice is what makes it human. 6 months after that afternoon when Jessica begged on her knees for her children, my life had found a different rhythm, one I hadn't imagined possible when this all began. It was a slower, more thoughtful rhythm, like that of someone who has survived a storm and now appreciates the value of a clear sky. The mornings still began the same. Coffee at 6, watering the plants at 7, but now I had company on Friday afternoons. Sophia and Matthew came to visit after school, and we had established a routine that was healing all of us a little. Sophia would help me make iced tea while Matthew chased butterflies in the yard. We had watched the hummingbirds hatch in the lime tree, and now the little birds had become frequent visitors that the children awaited with excitement each week. Jessica kept her word scrupulously. She never asked for money, never questioned my decisions, and when she came to pick up the children, our interactions were polite but distant, like those of two neighbors who respect each other but don't know each other intimately. The forgiveness she had sought hadn't come, but mutual respect had grown slowly, like plants that need time to take root after being transplanted. Michael had been sentenced to 8 years in prison for fraud, forgery, and financial abuse of an elder. The news had been in the local papers as part of an awareness campaign about these types of crimes. His photo appeared in the crime section, with a caption that read, "CPA sentenced for attempting to defraud his own mother." Leo, my eldest grandson, had started therapy to process the reality of having a father in prison and a grandmother who had been the victim of her own son. But the story hadn't ended there. One Tuesday in April, as I was pruning the rose bushes that had bloomed with unusual exuberance after the March rains, I heard the familiar sound of a car stopping in front of my house. When I looked toward the street, I saw something I didn't expect. It was Leo, my 9-year-old grandson, walking alone to my door with a school backpack on and an expression on his face that seemed too mature for his age. "Hi, Grandma Grace," he said when I opened the gate, and his voice sounded different, deeper, as if he had grown years in these past months. "My love, what are you doing here? Where's your mother?" "My mom's at work. I took the bus from school. I know which route gets to your house now." A 9-year-old boy had traveled alone on public transportation to see me. The thought filled me with a mix of pride in his determination and concern for his safety. "Leo, you shouldn't be riding the bus alone. It's dangerous." "I know how to take care of myself, Grandma. Besides, I needed to talk to you about something important." I had him come in and made him a glass of lemonade, noticing how much he'd grown. He was no longer the little boy who played with my earrings. He was a young man learning to navigate an adult world more complicated than it should be for someone his age. "What did you want to talk about, sweetheart?" Leo took a sip of lemonade and looked at me with those eyes that so resembled Michael's when he was little, but now held a seriousness his father had never developed. "Grandma, I went to visit my dad in prison last Sunday." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew he had the right to visit his father, but I hadn't been emotionally prepared to face how that experience would affect my grandson. "How did you feel seeing your dad there?" "Bad," he answered with the brutal honesty only children can express. "He looked thin and sad, and he was scared that I hated him." "And do you?" Leo shook his head slowly. "I don't hate him, but I don't understand why he did what he did either. My therapist says that sometimes good people make bad choices, but my dad made a lot of bad choices for a long time." My grandson's wisdom astonished me. At 9 years old, he was processing concepts of morality and responsibility that many adults never fully grasp. "What did your dad say to you when you visited?" "He asked me to tell you that he's sorry, that he understands why you didn't drop the charges against him, and that he thanks you for dropping them against Aunt Jessica, so Sophia and Matthew can be with their mom." I felt something shift in my chest. Something like grief, but also relief. Michael had finally understood that my decisions hadn't been blind revenge, but carefully calibrated justice. "Is there anything else you want to tell me, Leo?" My grandson pulled a wrinkled envelope from his backpack. "My dad wrote you a letter. He said he doesn't expect you to read it, but if you want to, it's there." I took the envelope with slightly trembling hands. The paper was cheap, the kind they use in prisons, and my name was written in Michael's handwriting, but shakier, less self-assured. "Do you want me to read it now, or should we wait?" "Read it, Grandma. I already know what it says." My dad read it to me before he gave it to me. I opened the envelope carefully, as if it contained something fragile that could break with a sudden move. The letter was 2 pages long, handwritten in a script that resembled Michael's, but showed the marks of time and regret. "Mom," the letter began, "I know I don't deserve for you to read this, but Leo insisted on bringing it, and he deserves for his dad to try and do the right thing, even if it's too late. I've had 8 months to think about what we did, and every day I understand the magnitude of our betrayal more clearly. It wasn't just the money, Mom. It was that we treated you as if you were invisible, as if your feelings didn't matter, as if your dignity was something we could trade for our own convenience. Jessica tells me you've been wonderful with Sophia and Matthew, that you're still the loving grandmother you always were despite all the harm we caused. That tells me everything I need to know about who you really are and who I have been. I'm not writing to ask for your forgiveness, because I know I don't deserve it. I'm writing to tell you that I finally understand that you were an exemplary mother who raised a defective son. The problem was never you. The problem was me, and my inability to value what I had until I lost it. Leo is growing up to be a better man than I ever was. That's because of you, not me. Take care of him, Mom. Teach him the things I never learned about honor and respect. With love and regret that came far too late, Michael." When I finished reading, there were tears in my eyes. But they weren't tears of forgiveness. They were tears of grief for the son who could have been and never was. for the mother-son relationship that had died during those months of betrayal and might never be fully resurrected. "Are you going to write back, Grandma?" Leo's question forced me to confront something I had been avoiding. What would I do with this late-stage repentance? How does a mother respond to a son who finally understands his mistakes, but from a prison cell? "I don't know, my love. I need time to think about it. My therapist says that forgiveness isn't something we do for the people who hurt us. It's something we do for ourselves, to stop carrying weight that doesn't belong to us." The wisdom of my 9-year-old grandson left me speechless. Here was a boy who had lost his father due to his father's own actions, yet was learning about forgiveness and healing in ways I was still discovering. That night, after Leo went home in a taxi, I paid for, because I wasn't about to let him take public transport home alone. I sat in my rocking chair in the yard, rereading Michael's letter and reflecting on forgiveness. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a binary choice you make once and for all. It was a process, a path you walk step by step, day by day, like the growth of plants that requires time, patience, and the right conditions to flourish. Maybe someday I could completely forgive Michael. Maybe not. But what I did know was that I was no longer carrying the weight of his betrayal like a stone in my chest. I had learned to live with the scar without allowing the wound to keep bleeding. And in that acceptance of the imperfection of forgiveness, I found a peace I hadn't expected, the peace of a woman who had fought for her dignity and won something more valuable than revenge. She had won self-respect and the certainty that no one, ever again, could take from her what truly mattered. 2 weeks later, I wrote a letter back to Michael. It wasn't a letter of forgiveness, but it wasn't a letter of condemnation either. It was the letter of a mother who acknowledged that her son had finally grown up, even if he'd had to hit rock bottom to do it. Sometimes, a mother's love means allowing consequences to teach the lessons that words could not. A year after all that chaos, my life had taken a direction I had never imagined. It was an October morning, just like the one when it all began, but this time the smell of my vanilla candle mixed with the aroma of coffee I was brewing for more than one person. I had decided to turn my house into something that would give meaning to all the pain I had lived through. The idea had come slowly, like plants that grow without you noticing until one day you see them in full bloom. First, it was Maria, my neighbor, who knocked on my door one Thursday afternoon with her eyes swollen from crying. "Grace, I don't know who else to talk to," she had said, sitting in my living room with trembling hands. "My son Robert wants me to sign some papers to put my house in his name. He says it's for protection, in case I get sick, but something doesn't feel right." As I listened to her story, I recognized the same patterns I had lived through. The lies disguised as concern, the manipulation wrapped in filial love, the systematic way of making a mother doubt her own lucidity. Maria didn't just need advice. She needed someone who understood exactly what she was going through. Then, it was Mrs. Sanchez, the woman who sold tamales on the corner. Her grandsons had emptied her savings account using a card she had co-signed for emergencies. Then came another Grace, a retired teacher like me, whose children had sold her car without her permission and split the money. Within 6 months, my living room had become an informal refuge for older women who were being financially and emotionally abused by their own families. We met on Tuesday afternoons, drank coffee, and shared stories that were all too similar to be a coincidence. It was Eleanor who suggested I formalize what I was already doing. "Grace, you need to register this as a nonprofit organization. You need to give it structure, get legal support, make it something bigger than just coffee talks in your living room." And so, the Hope Project was born, an organization I had founded with the very money Michael and Jessica had tried to steal from me. The irony was not lost on me. I was using my own inheritance to protect other women from the same abuses I had suffered. Now, on Tuesday afternoons, my house filled with the voices of women between 60 and 80 years old, all with different stories but a similar pain. We had the support of 2 young lawyers who worked pro bono, a psychologist specializing in family abuse, and a social worker who helped us navigate the legal and healthcare systems. But more important than the professional support was the emotional support we gave one another. There was something powerful in seeing a 75-year-old woman regain the confidence to report an abusive son because she had heard that another 80-year-old woman had done the same. and had survived. On the October morning where this story comes to a close, I was preparing the living room for our weekly meeting when the phone rang. It was Leo, but his voice sounded different, more excited than usual. "Grandma Grace, can I come see you today after school? I have something important to tell you." "Of course, my love. Is everything okay?" "Yes, it's okay. Better than okay. It's about my dad." When Leo arrived that afternoon, the women of the Hope Project had already left after a particularly emotional session where we had helped a Mrs. Rodriguez understand that her children had no legal right to sell her house without her consent, no matter how many times they told her it was for her own good. My grandson sat in the rocking chair, which was now his favorite spot when he came to visit, and looked at me with those eyes that looked more like Arthur's every day. "Grandma, my dad is getting out of prison." The words hit me like cold water. Michael had been sentenced to 8 years, but he had barely served 1. "How is that possible, Leo?" "His lawyer got his sentence reduced because he's doing something good in prison." Leo explained that Michael had started teaching financial literacy classes to other inmates, teaching them about budgeting, saving, and financial planning. But more importantly, he had started facilitating a therapy group for men who had committed crimes against their own family members. The judge said my dad is showing genuine rehabilitation and that his work is helping other inmates understand why they hurt their families. He's getting out in 6 months on parole. I felt a complex mix of emotions that I didn't know how to process. Part of me was happy for Leo, who would get to have his father back. Another part of me felt a fear that Michael would return to our lives, bringing back the chaos we had learned to live without. "How do you feel about that, Leo?" My grandson was thoughtful for a moment, fiddling with the straps of his backpack like he used to do when he was younger. "I'm scared," he finally admitted, "but I'm also hopeful. My therapist says that people can really change if they work very hard at it, and my dad has been working very hard." "Have you talked to him about this?" "Yeah. He told me he knows he needs to earn the right to be my dad again. That he understands that getting out of prison doesn't automatically mean everything will be okay between us." The maturity of my 10-year-old grandson continued to astonish me. He had grown more in these 2 years than many adults do in entire decades. "And what do you think, Grandma? Do you believe people can really change?" It was a profound question that forced me to reflect on everything I had learned in these months of working with women who had been hurt by their loved ones. I believe people can change, Leo, but I also believe that real change takes a very long time and a lot of work. And I believe that the people who have been hurt have the right to protect themselves until they are sure that change is genuine. Does that mean you won't want to see my dad when he gets out? It means I'm going to be very careful. Your father will have to prove with actions, not with words, that he has truly changed. And that is going to take time. That night, after Leo left, I sat in my backyard looking at the stars and reflecting on the cycles of harm and healing I had observed in my own family and in the families of the women I now supported. I had learned that forgiveness is not a destination you arrive at, but a path you walk. I had learned that you can love someone and still protect yourself from them. I had learned that sometimes the most loving consequence you can give someone is to allow them to fully experience the outcome of their actions. 6 months later, on a Wednesday morning as I was watering my wisteria, I heard familiar footsteps in my yard. When I turned around, there was Michael. But this wasn't the arrogant Michael who had come to talk to me about my situation 2 years ago. It wasn't the desperate Michael who had brought lawyers to negotiate his freedom. This was a 45-year-old man who looked as though he had aged a decade, with gray hairs he didn't have before, and lines on his face that spoke of sleepless nights and days of forced reflection. "Hi, Mom," he said, standing by the gate, not daring to enter without permission. "Hello, Michael." We looked at each other in silence for a moment that felt eternal. I was holding the garden hose. He was carrying a manila folder that I recognized as the same kind he had brought that first time, but now his hands were trembling slightly. "Can I come in?" "Not into the house. Just the yard. I have something to give you." I nodded, and he walked slowly toward me, keeping a respectful distance. "Mom, I came to give you this," he said, handing me the folder. "These are all the legal documents to transfer my share of Dad's inheritance to you. Everything that was mine, everything I tried to steal from you, I'm officially renouncing it." I took the folder without opening it. "Why?" Because I don't deserve it. Because I want you to know that I understand that actions have consequences that last longer than prison sentences. Because I hope that one day, maybe, you can trust that I have truly changed. Michael, the money was never the important thing. I know, he replied, and for the first time in years his voice sounded genuinely humble. The important thing was respect. The important thing was treating you like the mother you were, not the obstacle I thought you were. And that's what I really came to give back to you. My respect. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the wisteria blooming exuberantly in the morning sun. I'm not here to ask for your forgiveness, Mom, because I know that's something that could take years to come, if it ever comes at all. I came to tell you that I understand why you did what you did, and that I'm glad you were strong enough to defend yourself from me. His words came to me like rain after a drought, not because I needed his validation, but because they confirmed something I had begun to believe, that sometimes the greatest pain can lead to the deepest growth. What are your plans now? I asked. Work, therapy, earning the right to be the father Leo deserves, and if you ever let me, proving that I can be the son you deserved from the beginning. When Michael left that day, I knew our story wasn't over. But I also knew a new chapter had begun, one where mutual respect was possible because it had been earned through pain, consequence, and hard work. Have you ever experienced something like this? Or do you know someone who has gone through a family betrayal like this one? If this story touched your heart, let me know in the comments. And if you think this message can help someone who needs to hear that it's possible to fight back and move forward, please like this video and share this channel. Sometimes one person's story can be the beacon another needs to find their own path to dignity and self-respect.